Section 21 of To the Last Man by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11, Part 1. When Ellen, utterly spent in body and mind, reached home that day, a melancholy, sultry twilight was falling. Fitful flares of sheet lightning swept across the dark horizon to the east. The cabins were deserted. Antonio and the Mexican woman were gone. The circumstances made Ellen wonder, but she was too tired and too sunken in spirit to think long about it, or to care. She fed and watered her horse and left him in the corral. Then, supperless, and without removing her clothes, she threw herself upon the bed and at once sank into heavy slumber. Sometime during the night she awoke. Coyotes were yelping, and from that sound she concluded it was near dawn. Her body ached, her mind seemed dull. Drowsily she was sinking into slumber again when she heard the rapid clip-clop of trotting horses. Startled, she raised her head to listen. The men were coming back. Relief and dread seemed to clear her stupor. The trotting horses stopped across the lane from her cabin, evidently at the corral where she had left Spades. She heard him whistle. From the sound of hoofs she judged the number of horses to be 6 or 8. Low voices of men mingled with thuds and cracking of straps and flopping of saddles on the ground. After that the heavy tread of boots sounded on the porch of the cabin opposite. A door creaked on its hinges. Next, a slow footstep, accompanied by clinking spurs, approached Ellen's door, and a heavy hand banged upon it. She knew this person could not be her father. "Hello, Ellen?" She recognized the voice as belonging to Colter. Somehow its tone, or something about it, sent a little shiver down her spine. It acted like a revivifying current. Ellen lost her dragging lethargy. "Hey, Ellen, are you there?" added Colter, louder voice. "Yes, of course I'm here," she replied. "What do you want?" "Well, I'm sure glad you're home," he replied. "Antonio's gone with his squaw, and I was some worried about you." "Who's with you, Colter?" queried Ellen, sitting up. "Rock Wells and Springer. Tad Jorth was with us, but we had to leave him over here in a cabin." "What's the matter with him?" "Well, he's hurt tolerable bad," was the slow reply. Ellen heard Colter's spurs jangle, as if he had uneasily shifted his feet. "Where's Dad and Uncle Jackson?" asked Ellen. A silence, pregnant enough to augment Ellen's dread, finally broke to Colter's voice, somehow different. "Shore they're back on the trail, and we're to meet them where we left Tad." "Are you going away again?" "I reckon. And Ellen, you're going with us." "I am not," she retorted. "Wal, you are if I have to pack you," he replied, forcibly. "It's not safe here any more. That damned half breed Isbel with his gang are on our trail." The name seemed like a red hot blade at Ellen's leaden heart. She wanted to fling 100 queries on Colter, but she could not utter one. "Ellen, we've got to hit the trail and hide," continued Colter, anxiously. "You mustn't stay here alone. Suppose them Isbels would trap you. They'd tear off your clothes and rope you to a tree. Ellen, shore you're going. You hear me?" "Yes, I'll go," she replied, as if forced. "Wal, that's good," he said, quickly, "an' rustle tolerable lively. We've got to pack." The slow jangle of Colter's spurs and his slow steps moved away out of Ellen's hearing. Throwing off the blankets, she put her feet to the floor and sat there a moment staring at the blank nothingness of the cabin interior in the obscure gray of dawn. Cold, gray, dreary, obscure, like her life, her future. And she was compelled to do what was hateful to her. As a Jorth, she must take to the unfrequented trails and hide like a rabbit in the thickets. But the interest of the moment, a premonition of events to be, quickened her into action. Ellen unbarred the door and let in the light. Day was breaking, with an intense, clear, steely light in the east, through which the morning stars still shone white. A ruddy flare betokened the advent of the sun. Ellen unbraided her tangled hair and brushed and combed it. A queer, still pang came to her at sight of pine needles tangled in her brown locks. Then she washed her hands and face. Breakfast was a matter of considerable work, and she was hungry. The sun rose and changed the gray world of forest. For the first time in her life Ellen hated the golden brightness, the wonderful blue of sky, the scream of the eagles, and the screech of the jay, and the squirrels she had always loved to feed were neglected that morning. Colter came in. Ellen had never before looked attentively at him, or else he had changed. Her scrutiny of his lean, hard features accorded him more Texan attributes than formerly. His gray eyes were as light, as clear, as fierce as those of an eagle, and the sand gray of his face, the long, drooping, fair mustache, hid the secrets of his mind, but not its strength. The instant Ellen met his gaze she sensed a power in him that she instinctively opposed. Colter had not been so bold nor so rude as Daggs, but he was the same kind of man, perhaps the more dangerous for his secretiveness, his cool, waiting inscrutableness. "Mornin', Ellen," he drawled. "You shore look good for sore eyes." "Don't pay me compliments, Colter," replied Ellen. "And your eyes are not sore." "Wal, I'm sore, shore, from fightin' and ridin' and layin' out," he said, bluntly. "Tell me what happened," returned Ellen. "Girl, it's a tolerable long story," replied Colter. "And we've no time now. Wait till we get to camp." "Am I to pack my belongings or leave them here?" asked Ellen. "Reckon you'd better leave them here." "But if we did not come back?" "Wal, I reckon it's not likely we'll come soon," he said, rather evasively. "Colter, I'll not go off into the woods with just the clothes I have on my back." "Ellen, we've shore got to pack all the grab we can. This shore ain't goin' to be a visit to neighbors. We're shy of pack horses. But you make up a bundle of belongin's you care for, an' the things you'll need bad. We'll throw it on somewhere." Colter stalked away across the lane, and Ellen found herself dubiously staring at his tall figure. Was it the situation that struck her with a foreboding perplexity, or was it her intuition steeling her against this man? Ellen could not decide, but she had to go with him. Her prejudice was unreasonable at this portentous moment, and she could not yet feel that she was solely responsible to herself. When it came to making a small bundle of her belongings she was in a quandary. She discarded this and put in that, and then reversed the order. Next in preciousness to her mother's things were the long hidden gifts of Jean Isbel. She could part with neither. While she was selecting and packing this bundle, Colter again entered and without speaking began to rummage in the corner where her father kept his possessions. This irritated Ellen. "What do you want there?" she demanded. "Wal, I reckon your dad wants his papers an' the gold he left heah an' a change of clothes. Now doesn't he?" returned Colter, coolly. "Of course. But I suppose you would have me pack them." Colter vouchsafed no reply to this, but deliberately went on rummaging with little regard for how he scattered things. Ellen turned her back on him. At length, when he left, she went to her father's corner and found that, as far as she was able to see, Colter had taken neither papers nor clothes, but only the gold. Perhaps, however, she had been mistaken, for she had not observed Colter's departure closely enough to know whether or not he carried a package. She missed only the gold. Her father's papers, old and musty, were scattered about, and these she gathered up to slip in her own bundle. Colter or one of the men had saddled Spades, and now he was tied to the corral fence, champing his bit and pounding the sand. Ellen wrapped bread and meat inside her coat, and after tying this behind her saddle She was ready to go, but evidently she would have to wait, and preferring to remain outdoors, she stayed by her horse. Presently, while watching the men pack, she noticed that Springer wore a bandage round his head under the brim of his sombrero. His motions were slow and lacked energy. Shuddering at the sight, Ellen refused to conjecture. All too soon she would learn what happened, and all too soon, perhaps, she herself would be in the midst of another fight. She watched the men. They were making a hurried, slipshod job of packing food supplies from both cabins. More than once she caught Colter's gray gleam of gaze on her, and she did not like it. "I'll ride up and say good bye to Sprague," she called to Colter. "Shore you won't do nothin' of that kind," he called back. There was authority in his tone that angered Ellen, and something else which inhibited her anger. What was there about Colter with which she must reckon? The other two Texans laughed aloud, to be suddenly silenced by Colter's harsh and lowered curses. Ellen walked out of hearing and sat upon a log, where she remained until Colter hailed her. "Get up and ride," he called. Ellen complied with this order, and riding up behind the three mounted men, she soon found herself leaving what for years had been her home. Not once did she look back. She hoped she would never see the squalid, bare pretension of a ranch again. Colter and the other riders drove the pack horses across the meadow, off of the trails, and up the slope into the forest. Not very long did it take Ellen to see that Colter's object was to hide his tracks. He zigzagged through the forest, avoiding the bare spots of dust, the dry, sun-baked flats of clay where water lay in spring, and he chose the grassy open glades, the long pine needle matted aisles. Ellen rode at their heels, and it pleased her to watch for their tracks. Colter manifestly had been long practiced in this game of hiding his trail, and he showed the skill of a rustler. But Ellen was not convinced that he could ever elude a real woodsman. Not improbably, however, Colter was only aiming to leave a trail difficult to follow, and which would allow him and his confederates ample time to forge ahead of pursuers. Ellen could not accept a certainty of pursuit. Yet Colter must have expected it, and Springer and Wells also, for they had a dark, sinister, furtive demeanor that strangely contrasted with the cool, easy manner habitual to them. They were not seeking the level routes of the forest land, that was sure. They rode straight across the thick timbered ridges down into another canyon, up out of that, and across rough, rocky bluffs, and down again. These riders headed a little to the northwest, and every mile brought them into wilder, more rugged country, until Ellen, losing count of canyons and ridges, had no idea where she was. No stop was made at noon to rest the laboring, sweating pack animals. Under circumstances where pleasure might have been possible, Ellen would have reveled in this hard ride into a wonderful forest, ever thickening and darkening. But the wild beauty of glade and the spruce slopes and the deep bronze-walled canyons left her cold. She saw and felt, but had no thrill, except now and then a thrill of alarm, when Spades slid to his haunches down some steep, damp, piney declivity. All the woodland up and down appeared to be richer, greener, as they traveled farther west. Grass grew thick and heavy. Water ran in all ravines. The rocks were bronze and copper and russet, and some had green patches of lichen. Ellen felt the sun now on her left cheek, and knew that the day was waning, and that Colter was swinging farther to the northwest. She had never before ridden through such heavy forest and down and up such wild canyons. Toward sunset the deepest and ruggedest canyon halted their advance. Colter rode to the right, searching for a place to get down through a spruce thicket that stood on end. Presently he dismounted, and the others followed suit. Ellen found that she could not lead Spades because he slid down upon her heels, so she looped the end of her reins over the pommel and left him free. She herself managed to descend by holding to branches and sliding all the way down that slope. She heard the horses cracking the brush, snorting and heaving. One pack slipped and had to be removed from the horse, and rolled down. At the bottom of this deep, green-walled notch roared a stream of water. Shadowed, cool, mossy, damp, this narrow gulch seemed the wildest place Ellen had ever seen. She could just see the sunset-flushed, gold-tipped spruces far above her. The men repacked the horse that had slipped his burden, and once more resumed their progress ahead, now turning up this canyon. There was no horse trail, but deer and bear trails were numerous. The sun sank and the sky darkened, but still the men rode on, and the farther they traveled the wilder grew the aspect of the canyon. At length Colter broke a way through a heavy thicket of willows and entered a side canyon, the mouth of which Ellen had not even descried. It turned and widened, and at length opened out into a round pocket, apparently enclosed, and as lonely and isolated a place as even pursued rustlers could desire. Hidden by jutting wall and thicket of spruce were two old log cabins, joined together by roof and attic floor, the same as the double cabin at the Jorth ranch. Ellen smelled wood smoke, and presently, on going round the cabins, she saw a bright fire. One man stood beside it, gazing at Colter's party, which evidently he had heard approaching. "Hello, Queen," said Colter. "How's Tad?" "He's holdin' on fine," replied Queen, bending over the fire, where he turned pieces of meat. "Where's father?" suddenly asked Ellen, addressing Colter. As if he had not heard her, he went on wearily, loosening a pack. Queen looked at her. The light of the fire only partially shone on his face. Ellen could not see his expression, but from the fact that Queen did not answer her question she got further intimation of impending catastrophe. The long wild ride had helped prepare her for the secrecy and taciturnity of men who had resorted to flight. Perhaps her father had been delayed, or was still off on the deadly mission that had obsessed him, or there might, and probably was, darker reasons for his absence. Ellen shut her teeth and turned to the needs of her horse, and presently, returning to the fire, she thought of her uncle. "Queen, is my Uncle Tad here?" she asked. "Shore he's in there," replied Queen, pointing at the nearer cabin. Ellen hurried toward the dark doorway. She could see how the logs of the cabin had moved awry, and what a big, dilapidated hovel it was. As she looked in, Colter loomed over her, placed a familiar and somehow masterful hand upon her. Ellen let it rest on her shoulder a moment. Must she forever be repulsing these rude men among whom her lot was cast? Did Colter mean what Daggs had always meant? Ellen felt herself weary, weak in body, and her spent spirit had not rallied. Yet whatever Colter meant by his familiarity, she could not bear it. So she slipped out from under his hand. "Uncle Tad, are you here?" she called into the blackness. She heard the mice scamper and rustle, and she smelled the musty, old, woody odor of a long unused cabin. "Hello, Ellen," came a voice she recognized as her uncle's. Yet it was strange. "Yes, I'm here. Bad luck to me. How you bucking up, girl?" "I'm all right, Uncle Tad. Only tired and worried. I " "Tad, how's your hurt?" interrupted Colter. "Reckon I'm easier," replied Jorth, wearily. "But shore I'm in bad shape. I'm still spitting blood. I keep telling Queen that bullet lodged in my lungs, but he says it went through." "Well, hang on, Tad," replied Colter, with a cheerfulness Ellen sensed was really indifferent. "Oh, what the hell's the use?" exclaimed Jorth. "It's all up with us, Colter." "Wal, shut up, then," tersely returned Colter. "It ain't doin' you or us any good to holler." Tad Jorth did not reply to this. Ellen heard his breathing, and it did not seem natural. It rasped a little, came hurriedly, then caught in his throat. Then he spat. Ellen shrunk back against the door. He was breathing through blood. "Uncle, are you in pain?" she asked. "Yes, Ellen. It burns like hell," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry. Isn't there something I can do?" "I reckon not. Queen did all anybody could do for me now, unless it's pray." Colter laughed at this, the slow, easy, drawling laugh of a Texan, but Ellen felt pity for this wounded uncle. She had always hated him. He had been a drunkard, a gambler, a waster of her father's property, and now he was a rustler and a fugitive, lying in pain, perhaps mortally hurt. "Yes, uncle, I will pray for you," she said, softly. End of chapter 11, part 1. "22 of To the Last Man" by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11, part 2. The change in his voice held a note of sadness that she had been quick to catch. "Ellen, you're the only good Jorth in the whole damned lot," he said. "God, I see it all now. We've dragged you to hell." "Yes, Uncle Ted, I sure been dragged some, but not yet to hell," she responded, with a break in her voice. "You will be, Ellen, unless " "Aw, shut up that kind of gab, will you?" broke in Colter, harshly. It amazed Ellen that Colter should dominate her uncle, even though he was wounded. Tad Jorth had been the last man to take orders from anyone, much less a rustler of the Hash Knife Gang. This Colter began to loom up in Ellen's estimate as he loomed physically over her, a lofty figure, dark, motionless, somehow menacing. "Ellen, has Colter told you yet about Lee and Jackson?" inquired the wounded man. The pitch black darkness of the cabin seemed to help fortify Ellen to bear further trouble. "Colter told me that Dad and Uncle Jackson would meet us here," she rejoined, hurriedly. Jorth could be heard breathing in difficulty, and he coughed and spat again and seemed to hiss: "Ellen, he lied to you. They'll never meet us here." "Why not?" whispered Ellen. "Because, Ellen," he replied in husky pants, "your dad and Uncle Jackson are dead and buried." If Ellen suffered a terrible shock, it was a blankness, a deadness, a slow creeping failure of sense in her knees. They gave way under her and she sank on the grass against the cabin wall. She did not faint, nor grow dizzy, nor lose her sight, but for a while there was no process of thought in her mind. Suddenly it was there, the quick, spiritual rending of her heart, followed by a profound emotion of intimate and irretrievable loss, and after that grief and bitter realization. An hour later Ellen found strength to go to the fire and partake of the food and drink her body sorely needed. Colter and the men waited on her solicitously and in silence, now and then stealing furtive glances at her from under the shadow of their black sombreros. The dark night settled down like a blanket. There were no stars. The wind moaned fitfully among the pines, and all about that lonely, hidden recess was in harmony with Ellen's thoughts. "Girl, you're shore game," said Colter, admiringly. "An' I reckon you never got it from the Jorths." "Tad in there, he's game," said Queen, in mild protest. "Not to my notion," replied Colter. "Any man can be game when he's croakin' with somebody around. But Lee Jorth an' Jackson, they always was yellow clear to their gizzards. They was born in Louisiana, not Texas. Shore they're no more Texans than I am. Ellen here, she must have got another strain in her blood." To Ellen their words had no meaning. She rose and asked, "Where can I sleep?" "I'll fetch a light presently, and you can make your bed in there by Tad," replied Colter. "Yes, I'd like that." "Wal, if you reckon you can coax him to talk you're shore wrong," declared Colter, with that cold timbre of voice that struck like steel on Ellen's nerves. "I cussed him good an' told him to keep his mouth shut. Talkin' makes him cough an' that fetches up the blood. Besides, I reckon I'm the one to tell you how your dad an' uncle got killed. Tad didn't see it done, an' he was bad hurt when it happened. Shore all the fellars left have their idea about it, but I've got it straight." "Colter, tell me now," cried Ellen. "Wal, all right. Come over heah," he replied, and drew her away from the camp fire out in the shadow of gloom. "Poor kid! I shore feel bad about it." He put a long arm around her waist and drew her against him. Ellen felt it, yet did not offer any resistance. All her faculties seemed absorbed in a morbid and sad anticipation. "Ellen, you shore know I always loved you, now don't you?" he asked, with suppressed breath. "No, Colter, it's news to me, an' not what I want to hear." "Wal, you may as well hear it right now," he said. "It's true. An' what's more, your dad gave you to me before he died." "What? Colter, you must be a liar." "Ellen, I swear I'm not lyin'," he returned, in eager passion. "I was with your dad last an' heard him last. He shore knew I loved you for years. An' he said he'd rather you be left in my care than anybody's." "My father gave you to me in marriage!" ejaculated Ellen, in bewilderment. Colter's ready assurance did not carry him over this point. It was evident that her words somewhat surprised and disconcerted him for the moment. "To let me marry a rustler one of the Hash Knife Gang!" exclaimed Ellen, with weary incredulity. "Wal, your dad belonged to Daggs's gang, same as I do," replied Colter, recovering his cool ardor. "No!" cried Ellen. "Yes, he shore did for years," declared Colter, positively. "Back in Texas. An' it was your dad that got Daggs to come to Arizona." Ellen tried to fling herself away, but her strength and her spirit were ebbing, and Colter increased the pressure of his arm. All at once she sank limp. Could she escape her fate? Nothing seemed left to fight with or for. "All right. Don't hold me so tight," she panted. "Now tell me how dad was killed. And who?" Colter bent over her so he could peer into her face. In the darkness Ellen just caught the gleam of his eyes. She felt the virile force of the man in the strain of his body as he pressed her close. It all seemed unreal, a hideous dream, the gloom, the moan of the wind, the weird solitude, and this rustler with hands and will like cold steel. "We'd come back to Greaves's store," Colter began. "An' as Greaves was dead we all got free with his liquor. Shore some of us got drunk. Bruce was drunk, an' Tad in there, he was drunk. Your dad put away more than I ever seen him. But shore he wasn't exactly drunk. He got one of them weak an' shaky spells. He cried an' he wanted some of us to get the Isbels to call off the fightin'. He shore was ready to call it quits. I reckon the killin' of Daggs an' then the awful way Greaves was cut up by Jean Isbel took all the fight out of your dad. He said to me, 'Colter, we'll take Ellen an' leave this heah country an' begin life all over again where no one knows us.'" "Oh, did he really say that? Did he really mean it?" murmured Ellen, with a sob. "I swear it by the memory of my dead mother," protested Colter. "Wal, when night come the Isbels rode down on us in the dark an' began to shoot. They smashed in the door, tried to burn us out, an' hollered around for a while. Then they left, an' we reckoned there'd be no more trouble that night. All the same we kept watch. I was the soberest one an' I bossed the gang. We had some quarrels about the drinkin'. Your dad said if we kept it up it'd be the end of the Jorths. An' he planned to send word to the Isbels next mornin' that he was ready for a truce, and I was to go fix it up with Gaston Isbel. Well, your dad went to bed in Greaves's room, and a little while later your Uncle Jackson went in there too. Some of the men laid down in the store and went to sleep. I kept guard till about 3 in the morning, and I got so sleepy I couldn't hold my eyes open. So I waked up Wells and Slater and set them on guard, one at each end of the store. Then I laid down on the counter to take a nap." Colter's low voice, the strain and breathlessness of him, the agitation which he appeared to be laboring, and especially the simple, matter of fact detail of his story, carried absolute conviction to Ellen Jorth. Her vague doubt of him had been created by his attitude toward her. Emotion dominated her intelligence. The images, the scenes called up by Colter's words were as true as the gloom of the wild gulch and the loneliness of the night solitude, as true as the strange fact that she lay passive in the arms of a rustler. "Well, after a while I woke up," went on Colter, clearing his throat. "It was gray dawn. All was still as death. And something sure was wrong. Wells and Slater had got to drinking again and now lay dead drunk or asleep. Anyways, when I kicked them they never moved. Then I heard a moan. It came from the room where your dad and uncle was. I went in. It was just light enough to see. Your Uncle Jackson was laying on the floor, cut half in two, dead as a doornail. Your dad lay on the bed. He was alive, breathing his last. He says that half breed Isbel knifed us while we slept. The window shutter was open. I seen where Jean Isbel had come in and gone out. I seen his moccasin tracks in the dirt outside, and I seen where he'd stepped in Jackson's blood and tracked it to the window. You shore can see them bloody tracks yourself if you go back to Greaves's store. Your dad was going fast. He said, 'Colter, take care of Ellen,' and I reckon he meant a lot by that. He kept saying, 'My God, if I'd only seen Gaston Isbel before it was too late!' And then he raved a little, whispering out of his head. And after that he died. I woke up the men, and about sunup we carried your dad and uncle out of town and buried them. And them Isbels shot at us while we were burying our dead. That's where Tad got his hurt. Then we hit the trail for Jorth's ranch. And now, Ellen, that's all my story. Your dad was ready to bury the hatchet with his old enemy. And that Nez Perce Jean Isbel, like the sneaking savage he is, murdered your uncle and your dad, cut 'em horrible, made 'em suffer tortures of hell, all for Isbel revenge." When Colter's husky voice ceased, Ellen whispered through lips as cold and still as ice, "Let me go. Leave me here alone." "Why, shore I reckon I understand," replied Colter. "I hated to tell you, but you had to hear the truth about that half breed. I'll carry your pack in the cabin and unroll your blankets." Releasing her, Colter strode off in the gloom. Like a dead weight, Ellen began to slide until she slipped down full length beside the log. And then she lay in the cool, damp shadow, inert and lifeless so far as outward physical movement was concerned. She saw nothing and felt nothing of the night, the wind, the cold, the falling dew. For the moment or hour she was crushed by despair and seemed to see herself sinking down and down into a black, bottomless pit, into an abyss where murky tides of blood and furious gusts of passion contended between her body and her soul, into the stormy blast of hell. In her despair she longed, she ached for death. Born of infidelity, cursed by the taint of evil blood, further cursed by higher instinct for good and happy life, dragged from one lonely and wild and sordid spot to another, never knowing love or peace or joy or home, left to the companionship of violent and vile men, driven by a strange fate to love with unquenchable and insupportable love a half breed, a savage, an Isbel, the hereditary enemy of her people, and at last the ruthless murderer of her father. What in the name of God had she left to live for? Revenge? An eye for an eye, a life for a life. But she could not kill Jean Isbel. Woman's love could turn to hate, but not the love of Ellen Jorth. He could drag her by the hair in the dust, beat her, and make her a thing to loathe, and cut her mortally in his savage and implacable thirst for revenge. But with her last gasp she would whisper she loved him, and that she had lied to him to kill his faith. It was that, his strange faith in her purity, which had won her love. Of all men, that he should be the one to recognize the truth of her, the womanhood yet unsullied. How strange, how terrible, how overpowering! False indeed was she to the Jorths, false as her mother had been to an Isbel. This agony and destruction of her soul was the bitter Dead Sea fruit, the sins of her parents visited upon her. "I'll end it all," she whispered to the night shadows that hovered over her. No coward was she. No fear of pain or mangled flesh or death or the mysterious hereafter could ever stay her. It would be easy. It would be a last thrill, a transport of self abasement and the supreme self proof of her love for Jean Isbel to kiss the Rim Rock where his feet had trod and then fling herself down into the depths. She was the last Jorth. So the wronged Isbels would be avenged. But he would never know. Never know I lied to him, she wailed to the night wind. She was lost, lost on earth and to hope of heaven. She had a right to neither live nor to die. She was nothing but a little weed along the trail of life, trampled upon, buried in the mud. She was nothing but a single rotten thread in a tangled web of love and hate and revenge. And she had broken. Lower and lower she seemed to sink. Was there no end to this gulf of despair? If Colter had returned he would have found her a rag and a toy, a creature degraded, fit for his vile embrace, to be thrust deeper into the mire, to be punished fittingly for her betrayal of a man's noble love and her own womanhood, to be made an end of body, mind, and soul. But Colter did not return. The wind mourned, the owls hooted, the leaves rustled, the insects whispered their melancholy night song. The camp fire flickered and faded. Then the wild forest land seemed to close imponderably over Ellen. All that she wailed in her despair, all that she confessed in her abasement, was true and hard as life could be. But she belonged to nature. If nature had not failed her, had God failed her? It was there, the lonely land of trees and fern and flower and brook, full of wild birds and beasts, where the mossy rocks could speak and the solitude had ears, where she had always felt herself unutterably a part of creation. Thus a wavering spark of hope quivered through the blackness of her soul and gathered light. The gloom of the sky, the shifting clouds of dull shade, split asunder to show a glimpse of a radiant star, piercingly white, cold, pure, a steadfast eye of the universe, beyond all understanding and illimitable with its meaning of the past and the present and the future. Ellen watched it until the drifting clouds once more hid it from her strained sight. What had that star to do with hell? She might be crushed and destroyed by life, but was there not something beyond? Just to be born, just to suffer, just to die, could that be all? Despair did not lose its hold on Ellen. The strife and pang of her breast did not subside. But with the long hours and the strange closing in of the forest around her, and the fleeting glimpse of that wonderful star, with a subtle divination of the meaning of her beating heart and throbbing mind, and lastly, with a voice thundering at her conscience that a man's faith in a woman must not be greater, nobler than her faith in God and eternity, With these she checked the dark flight of her soul toward destruction. Chapter 11. Part 2. Of To the Last Man by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12, Part 1. A chill, gray, somber dawn was breaking when Ellen dragged herself into the cabin and crept under her blankets, there to sleep the sleep of exhaustion. When she awoke the hour appeared to be late afternoon. Sun and sky shone through the sunken and decayed roof of the old cabin. Her uncle, Tad Jorth, lay upon a blanket bed upheld by a crude couch of boughs. The light fell upon his face, pale, lined, cast in a still mold of suffering. He was not dead, for she heard his respiration. The floor underneath Ellen's blankets was bare clay. She and Jorth were alone in this cabin. It contained nothing besides their beds and a rank growth of weeds along the decayed lower logs. Half of the cabin had a rude ceiling of rough-hewn boards, which formed a kind of loft. This attic extended through to the adjoining cabin, forming the ceiling of the porch-like space between the two structures. There was no partition. A ladder of 2 aspen saplings, pegged to the logs, and with braces between for steps, led up to the attic. Ellen smelled wood smoke and the odor of frying meat, and she heard the voices of men. She looked out to see that Slater and Somers had joined their party, an addition that might have strengthened it for defense, but did not lend to her own situation anything favorable. Somers had always appeared the one best to avoid. Colter espied her and called her to come and feed your pale face. His comrades laughed, not loudly but guardedly, as if noise was something to avoid. Nevertheless, they awoke Tad Jorth, who began to toss and moan on the bed. Ellen hurried to his side, and at once ascertained that he had a high fever and was in a critical condition. Every time he tossed he opened a wound in his right breast rather high up. For all she could see, nothing had been done for him except the binding of a scarf round his neck and under his arm. This scant bandage had worked loose. Going to the door, she called out, "Fetch me some water." When Colter brought it, Ellen was rummaging in her pack for some clothing or towel that she could use for bandages. "Weren't any of you decent enough to look after my uncle?" she queried. "Huh? Well, what the hell?" rejoined Colter. "We sure did all we could. I reckon you think it wasn't a tough job to pack him up the Rim. He was done for then, and I said so." "I'll do all I can for him," said Ellen. "Shore go ahead. When I get plugged or knifed by that half breed I shore hope you'll be round to nurse me." "You seem to be pretty shore of your fate, Colter." "Shore as hell," he bit out darkly. "Somers saw Isbel and his gang trailing us to the Jorth ranch." "Are you going to stay here and wait for them?" "Shore I've been quarreling with the fellows out there over that very question. I'm for leaving the country, but Queen, the damn gunfighter, is dead set to kill that cowman Blue, who swore he was King Fisher, the old Texas outlaw. None but Queen are spoiling for another fight. All the same, they won't leave Tad Jorth here alone." Then Colter leaned in at the door and whispered, "Ellen, I can't boss this outfit, so let's you and me shake 'em. I've got your dad's gold. Let's ride off to night and shake this country." Colter, muttering under his breath, left the door and returned to his comrades. Ellen had received her first intimation of his cowardice, and his mention of her father's gold started a train of thought that persisted in spite of her efforts to put all her mind to attending her uncle. He grew conscious enough to realize her working over him, and thanked her with a look that touched Ellen deeply. It changed the direction of her mind. His suffering and imminent death, which she was able to alleviate and retard somewhat, worked upon her pity and compassion so that she forgot her own plight. Half the night she was tending him, cooling his fever, holding him quiet. Well, she realized that but for her ministrations he would have died. At length he went to sleep. And Ellen, sitting beside him in the lonely, silent darkness of that late hour, received again the intimation of nature, those vague and nameless stirrings of her innermost being, those whisperings out of the night and the forest and the sky. Something great would not let go of her soul. She pondered. Attention to the wounded man occupied Ellen, and soon she redoubled her activities in this regard, finding in them something of protection against Colter. He had waylaid her as she went to the spring for water, with a lunge like that of a bear. He had tried to embrace her, but Ellen had been too quick. "Well, are you going away with me?" he demanded. "No, I'll stick by my uncle," she replied. That motive of hers seemed to obstruct his will. Ellen was keen to see that Colter and his comrades were at a last stand and disintegrating under a severe strain. Nerve and courage of the open and the wild they possessed, but only in a limited degree. Colter seemed obsessed by his passion for her, and though Ellen in her stubborn pride did not yet fear him, she realized she ought to. After that incident she watched closely, never leaving her uncle's bedside except when Colter was absent. One or more of the men kept constant lookout somewhere down the canyon. Day after day passed on the wings of suspense, of watching, of ministering to her uncle, of waiting for some hour that seemed fixed. Colter was like a hound upon her trail. At every turn he was there to importune her to run off with him, to frighten her with the menace of the Isbels, to beg her to give herself to him. It came to pass that the only relief she had was when she ate with the men or barred the cabin door at night. Not much relief, however, was there in the shut and barred door. With one thrust of his powerful arm Colter could have caved it in. He knew this as well as Ellen. Still she did not have the fear she should have had. There was her rifle beside her, and though she did not allow her mind to run darkly on its possible use, still the fact of it being there at hand somehow strengthened her. Colter was a cat playing with a mouse, but not yet sure of his quarry. Ellen came to know hours when she was weak physically, mentally, spiritually, morally, when, under the sheer weight of this frightful and growing burden of suspense, she was not capable of fighting her misery, her abasement, her low ebb of vitality, and at the same time wholly withstanding Colter's advances. He would come into the cabin, and, utterly indifferent to Tad Jorth, he would try to make bold and unrestrained love to Ellen. When he caught her in one of her unresisting moments and was able to hold her in his arms and kiss her, he seemed to be beside himself with the wonder of her. At such moments, if he had any softness or gentleness in him, they expressed themselves in his sooner or later letting her go, when apparently she was about to faint. So it must have become fascinatingly fixed in Colter's mind that at times Ellen repulsed him with scorn and at others could not resist him. Ellen had escaped two crises in her relation with this man, and as a morbid doubt, like a poisonous fungus, began to strangle her mind, she instinctively divined that there was an approaching and final crisis. No uplift of her spirit came this time, no intimations, no whisperings. How horrible it all was! Too long to be good and noble, to realize that she was neither, to sink lower day by day. Must she decay like one of these rotting logs? Worst of all, then, was the insinuating and ever growing hopelessness. What was the use? What did it matter? Who would ever think of Ellen Jorth? "Oh, God!" she whispered in her distraction. "Is nothing left nothing at all?" A period of several days of less torment to Ellen followed. Her uncle apparently took a turn for the better and Colter let her alone. This last circumstance nonplussed Ellen. She was at a loss to understand it unless the Isbel menace now encroached upon Colter so formidably that he had forgotten her for the present. Then one bright August morning, when she had begun to relax her eternal vigilance and breathe without oppression, Colter encountered her, darkly silent and fierce. He grasped her and drew her off her feet. Ellen struggled violently, but the total surprise had deprived her of strength, and that paralyzing weakness assailed her as never before. Without apparent effort Colter carried her, striding rapidly away from the cabins into the border of spruce trees at the foot of the canyon wall. "Colter, where oh, where are you taking me?" she found voice to cry out. "By God, I don't know," he replied, with strong, vibrant passion. "I was a fool not to carry you off long ago. But I waited. I was hopin' y'u'd love me. An' now that Isbel gang has corralled us. Somers has seen the half breed up on the rocks, an' Springer's seen the rest of them sneakin' around. I run back after my horse an' you." "But Uncle Tad we mustn't leave him alone," cried Ellen. "We've got to," replied Colter, grimly. "Tad shore won't worry you no more soon as Jean Isbel gets to him." "Oh, let me stay," implored Ellen. "I will save him." Colter laughed at the utter absurdity of her appeal and claim. Suddenly he set her down upon her feet. "Stand still," he ordered. Ellen saw his big bay horse saddled with pack and blanket tied there in the shade of a spruce. With swift hands Colter untied him and mounted him, scarcely moving his piercing gaze from Ellen. He reached to grasp her. "Up with you! Put your foot in the stirrup!" His will, like his powerful arm, was irresistible for Ellen at that moment. She found herself swung up behind him. Then the horse plunged away. What with the hard motion and Colter's iron grasp on her, Ellen was in a painful position. Her knees and feet came into violent contact with branches and snags. He galloped the horse, tearing through the dense thicket of willows that served to hide the entrance to the side canyon, and when out in the larger and more open canyon he urged him to a run. Presently, when Colter put the horse to a slow rise of ground, thereby bringing him to a walk, it was just in time to save Ellen a serious bruising. Again the sunlight appeared to shade over. They were in the pines. Suddenly, with backward lunge, Colter halted the horse. Ellen heard a yell. She recognized Queen's voice. "Turn back, Colter! Turn back!" With an oath Colter wheeled his mount. "If I didn't run plumb into them!" he ejaculated, harshly. And scarcely had the goaded horse gotten a start when a shot rang out. Ellen felt a violent shock, as if her momentum had suddenly met with a check, and then she felt herself wrenched from Colter, from the saddle, and propelled into the air. She alighted on soft ground and thick grass, and was unhurt save for the violent wrench and shaking that had rendered her breathless. Before she could rise, Colter was pulling at her, lifting her to her feet. She saw the horse lying with bloody head. Tall pines loomed all around. Another rifle cracked. "Run!" hissed Colter, and he bounded off, dragging her by the hand. Another yell pealed out. "Here we are, Colter!" Again it was Queen's shrill voice. Ellen ran with all her might, her heart in her throat, and her sight failing to record more than a blur of passing pines and a blank green wall of spruce. Then she lost her balance, was falling, yet she could not fall because of that steel grip on her hand, and was dragged and finally carried into a dense shade. She was blinded. The trees whirled and faded. Voices and shots sounded far away. Then something black seemed to be wiped across her feeling. It turned to gray, to moving blankness, to dim, hazy objects, spectral and tall, like blanketed trees, and when Ellen fully recovered consciousness she was being carried through the forest. "Well, little one, that was a close shave for you," said Colter's hard voice, growing clearer. "Reckon your keelin' over was natural enough." He held her lightly in both arms, her head resting above his left elbow. Ellen saw his face as a gray blur, then taking sharper outline until it stood out distinctly, pale and clammy, with eyes cold and wonderful in their intense flare. As she gazed upward, Colter turned his head to look back through the woods, and his motion betrayed a keen, wild vigilance. The veins of his lean brown neck stood out like whipcords. Two comrades were stalking beside him. Ellen heard their stealthy steps, and she felt Colter sheer from one side to the other. They were proceeding cautiously, fearful of the rear, but not wholly trusting to the fore. "Reckon we'd better go slow and look before we leap," said one whose voice Ellen recognized as Springer's. "Shore that open slope ain't to my likin', with our Nez Perce friend prowling round," drawled Colter, as he set Ellen down on her feet. Another of the rustlers laughed. "Say, can't he twinkle through the forest? I had 4 shots at him. Harder to hit than a turkey running crossways." This facetious speaker was the evil visaged, sardonic Somers. He carried 2 rifles and wore 2 belts of cartridges. "Ellen, shore you ain't so dead white as you was," observed Colter, and he chucked her under the chin with familiar hand. "Set down here. I don't want you stopping any bullets. And there's no tellin'." Ellen was glad to comply with his wish. She had begun to recover wits and strength, yet she still felt shaky. She observed that their position then was on the edge of a well wooded slope from which she could see the grassy canyon floor below. They were on a level bench projecting out from the main canyon wall that loomed gray and rugged and pine fringed. Somers and Colter and Springer gave careful attention to all points of the compass, especially in the direction from which they had come. They evidently anticipated being trailed or circled or headed off, but did not manifest much concern. Somers lit a cigarette. Springer wiped his face with a grimy hand and counted the shells in his belt, which appeared to be half empty. Colter stretched his long neck like a vulture and peered down the slope and through the aisles of the forest up toward the canyon rim. End of chapter 12, part 1. '24 of To the Last Man by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12, part 2. "Listen," he said tersely, and bent his head a little to one side, ear to the slight breeze. They all listened. Ellen heard the beating of her heart, the rustle of leaves, the tapping of a woodpecker, and faint, remote sounds that she could not name. "Deer, I reckon," spoke up Somers. "Aw, wal, I reckon they ain't trailin' us yet," replied Colter. "We gave them a shade better than they sent us." "Short an' sweet," ejaculated Springer, and he removed his black sombrero to poke a dirty finger through a bullet hole in the crown. "That's how close I come to cachin'. I was lyin' behind a log, listenin' an' watchin', an' when I stuck my head up a little, zam! Somebody made my bonnet leak." "Where's Queen?" asked Colter. "He was with me first off," replied Somers. "An' then when the shootin' slacked, after I plugged that big red faced, white haired pal of Isbel's " "Reckon that was Blaisdell," interrupted Springer. "Queen, he got tired layin' low," went on Somers. "He wanted action. I heard him chewin' to himself, an' when I asked him what was eatin' him he up an' growled that he was goin' to quit this Injun fightin', an' he slipped off in the woods." "Wal, that's the gun fighter of it," declared Colter, wagging his head. "Ever since that cowman, Blue, braced us and said he was Kingfisher, why Queen has been sulkier and sulkier. He can't help it. He'll do the same trick as Blue tried, and he'll shore get his everlasting. But he's the Texas breed, all right." "Say, d'you reckon Blue really is Kingfisher?" queried Somers. "Naw," ejaculated Colter, with downward sweep of his hand. "Many a would be gunslinger has borrowed Fisher's name. But Fisher is dead these many years." "Ahuh! Wal, maybe. But don't you forget it. That Blue was no would be," declared Somers. "He was the genuine article." "I should smile," affirmed Springer. The subject irritated Colter. He dismissed it with another forcible gesture and a counter question. "How many left in that Isbel outfit?" "No tellin'. There was shore enough of 'em," replied Somers. "Anyhow, the woods was full of flyin' bullets. Springer, did you account for any of them?" "Nope, not that I noticed," responded Springer dryly. "I had my chance at the half breed. Reckon I was nervous." "Was Slater near you when he yelled out?" "No, he was lyin' beside Somers." "Wasn't that a queer way for a man to act?" broke in Somers. "A bullet hit Slater, cut him down the back as he was lyin' flat. Reckon it wasn't bad, but it hurt him so that he jumped right up an' staggered around. He made a target as big as a tree. An' maybe them Isbels didn't riddle him." "That was when I got my crack at Bill Isbel," declared Colter, with grim satisfaction. "When they shot my horse out from under me I had Ellen to think of an' couldn't get my rifle. Shore had to run, as you seen. Wal, as I only had my 6-shooter, there was nothin' for me to do but lay low an' listen to the sping of lead. Wells was standin' up behind a tree about 30 yards off. He got plugged, an' fallin' over, he began to crawl my way, still holdin' to his rifle. I crawled along the log to meet him, but he dropped about halfway. I went on an' took his rifle an' belt. When I peeped out from behind a spruce bush, then I seen Bill Isbel. He was shootin' fast, an' all of them was shootin' fast. That was when they had the open shot at Slater. Wal, I bored Bill Isbel right through his middle. He dropped his rifle, an' all bent double he fooled around in a circle till he flopped over the rim. I reckon he's layin' right up there somewhere below that dead spruce. I'd shore like to see him." "Ah, you'd be crazy as Queen if you tried that," declared Somers. "We're not out of the woods yet." "I reckon not," replied Colter. "An' I've lost my horse. Where'd you leave yours?" "They're down the canyon below that willow brake, an' saddled an' none of 'em tied. Reckon we'll have to look them up before dark." "Colter, what are we going to do?" demanded Springer. "Wait here a while, then cross the canyon an' work round up under the bluff back to the cabin." "And then what?" queried Somers, doubtfully eyeing Colter. "We've got to eat and we've got to have blankets," rejoined Colter testily. "And I reckon we can hide there and stand a better show in a fight than running for it in the woods." "Wal, I'm givin' you a hunch that it looked like you were runnin' for it," retorted Somers. "Yes, and packing the girl," added Springer. "Looks funny to me." Both rustlers eyed Colter with dark and distrustful glances. What he might have replied never transpired, for the reason that his gaze, always shifting around, had suddenly fixed on something. "Is that a wolf?" he asked, pointing to the Rim. Both his comrades moved to get in line with his finger. Ellen could not see from her position. "Shore that's a big lofer," declared Somers. "Reckon he scented us." "There he goes along the Rim," observed Colter. "He doesn't act leary. Looks like a good sign to me. Maybe the Isbels have gone the other way." "Looks bad to me," rejoined Springer gloomily. "An' why?" demanded Colter. "I seen that animal. First time I reckoned it was a lofer. Second time it was right near them Isbels. An' I'm damned now if I don't believe it's that half lofer sheep dog of Gass Isbel's." "Wal, what if it is?" "Ha! Shore we needn't worry about hidin' out," replied Springer, sententiously. "With that dog Jean Isbel could trail a grasshopper. "The hell you say!" muttered Colter. Manifestly, such a possibility put a different light upon the present situation. The men grew silent and watchful, occupied by brooding thoughts and vigilant surveillance of all points. Somers slipped off into the brush, soon to return, with intent look of importance. "I heerd somethin'," he whispered, jerking his thumb backward. "Rollin' gravel, crackin' of twigs. No deer. Reckon it'd be a good idea for us to slip round across this bench." "Wal, you fellars go, an' I'll watch heah," returned Colter. "Not much," said Somers, while Springer leered knowingly. Colter became incensed, but he did not give way to it. Pondering a moment, he finally turned to Ellen. "You wait heah till I come back. An' if I don't come in reasonable time you slip across the canyon an' through the willows to the cabins. Wait till about dark." With that he possessed himself of one of the extra rifles and belts and silently joined his comrades. Together they noiselessly stole into the brush. Ellen had no other thought than to comply with Colter's wishes. There was her wounded uncle, who had been left unattended, and she was anxious to get back to him. Besides, if she had wanted to run off from Colter, where could she go? Alone in the woods she would get lost and die of starvation. Her lot must be cast with the Jorth faction until the end. That did not seem far away. Her strained attention and suspense made the moments fly by. By and by several shots pealed out far across the side canyon on her right, and they were answered by reports sounding closer to her. The fight was on again. But these shots were not repeated. The flies buzzed, the hot sun beat down and sloped to the west, the soft warm breeze stirred the aspens, the ravens croaked, the red squirrels and blue jays chattered. Suddenly a quick, short yelp electrified Ellen, brought her upright with sharp, listening rigidity. Sure it was not a wolf, and hardly could it be a coyote. Again she heard it, the yelp of a sheep dog. She had heard that often enough to know, and she rose to change her position so she could command a view of the rocky bluff above. Presently she espied what really appeared to be a big timber wolf. But another yelp satisfied her that it really was a dog. She watched him. Soon it became evident that he wanted to get down over the bluff. He ran to and fro and then out of sight. In a few moments his yelp sounded from lower down, at the base of the bluff, and it was now the cry of an intelligent dog that was trying to call someone to his aid. Ellen grew convinced that the dog was near where Colter had said Bill Isbel had plunged over the declivity. Would the dog yelp that way if the man was dead? Ellen thought not. No one came, and the continuous yelping of the dog got on Ellen's nerves. It was a call for help, and finally she surrendered to it. Since her natural terror when Colter's horse was shot out from under her and she had been dragged away, she had not recovered from fear of the Isbels. But calm consideration now convinced her that she could hardly be in a worse plight in their hands than if she remained with Colter's. So she started out to find the dog. The wooded bench was level for a few hundred yards, and then it began to heave in rugged rocky bulges up toward the rim. It did not appear far to where the dog was barking, but the latter part of the distance proved to be a hard climb over jumbled rocks and through thick brush. Panting and hot, she at length reached the base of the bluff, to find that it was not very high. The dog espied her before she saw him, for he was coming toward her when she discovered him. Big, shaggy, grayish white and black, with wild, keen face and eyes he assuredly looked the reputation Springer had accorded him. But sagacious, guarded was his approach. He appeared friendly. "Hello, doggie," panted Ellen. "What's wrong up here?" He yelped. His ears lost their stiffness. His body sank a little, and his bushy tail wagged to and fro. What a gray, clear, intelligent look he gave her! Then he trotted back. Ellen followed him around a corner of bluff to see the body of a man lying on his back. Fresh earth and gravel lay about him, attesting to his fall from above. He had on neither coat nor hat, and the position of his body and limbs suggested broken bones. Ellen hurried to his side. She saw that the front of his shirt, low down, was a bloody blotch, but he could lift his head, his eyes were open, and he was perfectly conscious. Ellen did not recognize the dusty, skinned face, yet the mold of features, the look of the eyes, seemed strangely familiar. "You're Jorth's girl," he said, in faint voice of surprise. "Yes, I'm Ellen Jorth," she replied. "And are you Bill Isbel?" "All that's left of me. But I'm thankin' God somebody come, even a Jorth." Ellen knelt beside him and examined the wound in his abdomen. A heavy bullet had indeed, as Colter had avowed, torn clear through his middle. Even if he had not sustained other serious injury from the fall over the cliff, the terrible bullet wound meant death very shortly. Ellen shuddered. How inexplicable were men! How cruel, bloody, mindless! "Isbel, I'm sorry. There's no hope," she said, low voiced. "You've not long to live. I can't help you. God knows I'd do so if I could." "All over," he sighed, with his eyes looking beyond her. "I reckon. I'm glad. But you can do something for me. Will you?" "Indeed, yes. Tell me," she replied, lifting his dusty head on her knee. Her hands trembled as she brushed his wet hair back from his clammy brow. "I've something on my conscience," he whispered. The woman, the sensitive in Ellen, understood and pitied him then. "Yes," she encouraged him. "I stole cattle. My dad's in Blaisdell's and made deals with Daggs. All the crookedness wasn't on Jorth's side. I want my brother Jean to know." "I'll try to tell him," whispered Ellen, out of her great amaze. "We were all a bad lot except Jean," went on Isbel. "Dad wasn't fair. God, how he hated Jorth! Jorth, yes, who was your father. Well, they're even now." "How so?" faltered Ellen. "Your father killed Dad. At the last Dad wanted to save us. He sent word he'd meet him face to face an' let that end the feud. They met out in the road. But some one shot Dad down with a rifle an' then your father finished him." "And then Isbel," added Ellen, with unconscious mocking bitterness, "your brother murdered my dad." "What?" whispered Bill Isbel. "Shore you got it wrong. I reckon Jean could have killed your father, but he didn't. Queer, we all thought." "Ah! Who did kill my father?" burst out Ellen, and her voice rang like great hammers at her ears. "It was Blue. He went in the store alone faced the whole gang alone bluffed them taunted them told them he was King Fisher. Then he killed your dad and Jackson Jorth and Jean was out back of the store. We were out front. There was shooting. Colmor was hit. Then Blue ran out, bad hurt. Both of them died in Meeker's yard." "And so Jean Isbel has not killed a Jorth?" said Ellen, in strange, deep voice. "No," replied Isbel, earnestly. "I reckon this feud was hardest on Jean. He never lived heah. An' my sister Ann said he got sweet on you. Now did he?" Slow, stinging tears filled Ellen's eyes and her head sank low and lower. "Yes, he did," she murmured, tremulously. "Ah, well, that accounts," replied Isbel, wonderingly. "Too bad. It might have been. A man always sees different when he's dying. If I had my life to live over again. My poor kids deserted in their babyhood ruined for life all for nothing. May God forgive " Then he choked and whispered for water. Ellen laid his head back, and, rising, she took a sombrero and started hurriedly down the slope, making dust fly and rocks roll. Her mind was a seething ferment, Leaping, bounding, sliding down the weathered slope, she gained the bench to run across that and so on down into the open canyon to the willow bordered brook. Here she filled the sombrero with water and started back, forced now to walk slowly and carefully. It was then, with the violence and fury of intense muscular activity denied her, that the tremendous import of Bill Isbel's revelation burst upon her very flesh and blood, and transfiguring the very world of golden light and azure sky and speaking forest land that encompassed her. Not a drop of the precious water did she spill, not a misstep did she make, yet so great was the spell upon her that she was not aware she had climbed the steep slope until the dog yelped his welcome. Then, with all the flood of her emotions surging and resurging, she knelt to allay the parching thirst of this dying enemy whose words had changed frailty to strength, hate to love, and the gloomy hell of despair to something unutterable. But she had returned too late. Bill Isbel was dead. End of chapter 12, part 2.